Hey guys, what's up? Today we're going to be going through just a quick run through of how to shadow and light a face in different lighting scenarios. Because this was something some of you guys suggested as a tutorial in my poll on Instagram. So yeah, we're just going to do a quick run through here. I've started out with just a really basic Batman face. I tried to do very little lighting, if not none at all. So we're going to just go through different lighting scenarios for each of these and see how you can add some shadows and go as intense as you want or as light as you want, depending on your style or the situation you're dealing with. So we're going to start with this one, and here I've just done kind of a really easy lighting scenario, I find, where the light is just coming kind of from up and to the right. So basically it's going to be lighting up the left side of his face and shadowing the right side of his face. So if we just start with the sphere and go over the super basics, which you guys probably know, but it's always good to kind of just start with the basics just to know where all this is coming from. So I'm going to start with the sphere, and since the light is coming from up and above, this bottom left area of the sphere is going to be your darkest area. And usually in comic art, for the absolute darkest areas, they just use black. And it gives it that really nice kind of contrasted feel. So we have this black area, and then what you're going to want to do is render it out. So rendering, in case you don't know, is basically taking your scale from your absolute black, scaling it all the way to your white. So this is going to involve your cross-hatching. It's a bit too small. So we're going to start with very dark, and a lot of different people have their own unique rendering styles, so this will just depend on you and your preferences, but usually you can start out, so maybe this one is double hatched like this, and then maybe in this one you just kind of go out to more just vertical lines, and maybe those gradually fade to white. So we're going to implement this on the sphere. I'm just going to go around with one more line here. And we're just going to hatch that out. In a second, because my Apple Pen has run out of battery. Good thing it only takes 15 seconds to charge. Okay, this should be good. Okay, so we're just gonna... The trick is also to vary your line weight. So instead of just doing all your lines like this, you want to really try to start wide and kind of flick it out. So you're going from a thicker base to a thinner tip, and that's going to give you a smoother gradation of your values. And when you're rendering something, also keep the shape of that thing in mind. Because that is going to also really affect the way you render it. So if it's round, make sure you're giving your shadows that curve, and also making your rendering strokes have the same curve. So now that we've done that, and sometimes do a little highlight, whatever. Now that we've done that, we're going to try to apply the same shading on this Batman head. So basically, since the head is a lot more complex than just a sphere, you're going to have to think of it in terms of shapes and think about what parts of the face and what shapes of the face are lifted and which parts are sunken. So the parts that are lifted more, the light is going to hit them more, and the parts that are more sunken are going to be more cast in shadow. So we're going to start with our basic deepest blacks and our deepest shadows, and we're going to say that if the light's coming from up and to the right, it's probably going to cast this ear all in shadow. And we're probably going to have this all in shadow here. I'm just going to get a better brush for this. So probably this is all going to be shadowed. And remember about cast shadows as well, because this ear here is going to be casting a shadow across his face as well. So just keep that in mind. And then another thing to remember is your line width. So I didn't vary my line widths too much on these basic Batman drawings, because a lot of the time it really depends on what direction the light is coming from. So the areas that the light is not hitting as much are going to be thicker lines than the areas that are being hit by the light. So we can go in here, and this ear is going to be completely shadowed. And these lines on this side of Batman's face that are not being hit by the light are going to be thicker than the lines on the other side of his face that are being hit by the light. And it's Batman, so we're going to go for some dramatic shadows. And I'm going to say that kind of maybe this whole area here is going to be cast in shadow, with the exception of these kind of eyebrow bumps, whatever you call them, because they are more protruded from the face, so they are going to be more hit by the light than cast in shadow. So we're just going to bring this out here, and shadow out to the side. I'm just going to collect this all in. And one thing that's going to happen is we're going to lose these frown lines, these creases in his forehead, which is going to lose a bit of the dramatic effect of the expression on his face. So what you can do if you're working traditionally is you can just go back over those with some white ink. I use, I think it's a Sakura, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, white Jelly Roll pen, and those are really good. I've also used a white deco marker before, which is really good as well. So, but if you're working digitally, it's even easier, because we can just go back with our white pen in here, and we can just put those lines back in here. So don't want to lose that kind of intense facial expression. Okay, so, and we're not rendering yet. We're going to leave that till last. So right now we're just going to focus completely on the shadows of the face. So here we're just going to add a little more black in the areas that are cast in shadow. So his nose, this area where his cheekbone is not going to be completely cast in shadow. Remember, right now with this black, we're just doing the absolute deepest shadows. So some of the stuff that maybe the light isn't quite hitting, like this cheekbone here, but that's not completely cast in the darkest shadow, we're just going to leave till after, and we're going to do that by rendering. So here I'm just going more into some of the creases of his face that are going to be darker than other areas because maybe they are more sunken than other areas. And we're just always going to make sure that the light is moving to the right side of the face. Here I'm putting a shadow because this is the area where his cheek up here is more lifted up, and then it sinks again, the curvature of his face. So the part that's sunk in more is going to be a bit more shadowed. And if you want, you could do that just with rendering, depending on how dramatic you want your lighting to be. But right now I'm just going to go in with a black for that. And thicken these lines a little bit for shadows. And add a bit of a shadow here. So his chin is going to cast a shadow on his neck. So we're going to just drop in that shadow. Here where it's a bit more sunken in, we're going to drop in more shadow. Since the lighting is coming from up and to the right, I'm going to just cast deep shadow right here. Now we're just going to thicken these lines accordingly. This can be cast in shadow. Now, for some people, you could leave it like this, but I really like to keep the definition of the shapes you have as much as you can. So I'm just gonna go in now before rendering with this white ink again, and where the black is kind of mixing things together a little bit, just gonna go in with that ink just to keep your shapes nice and separate. This is optional. Definitely you don't have to do this. It's more just personal preference. Okay. So now that we have that, and we pretty much have all our deep shadows dropped in, we are going to start in with rendering. So, like I said before, rendering style is very much personal preference a lot of the time. What I've been told in the past is just keep it unique and whatever you prefer, but just make sure that it's clean and it's consistent and that you have a formula, and it's not just kind of all over the place. So here, this is not entirely black, but it is still pretty dark, so I'm gonna go in with a pretty thick rendering line just to kind of differentiate it a bit, but still to keep it pretty subtle. Okay, so now we're gonna get into rendering the darkest shadows. And here for rendering, I'm trying to vary my line width a bit, which I'm not great at remembering to do, but it is good to do to keep that variation in there. So if you are working digitally or using Clip Studio, right now I'm gonna go in with 12 size brush size, 12 size brushes, and right now I'm using a Milli pen. So if you go into your pens, this is the Milli pen. I've adjusted the settings a little bit to make sure it kind of narrows the way I want it to in the strokes. But yeah, that's all up to personal preference as well. So here I'm just going to start rendering, starting with my thicker rendering lines and not quite getting into cross-hatching yet. I just want to get these thicker lines down. Just going to blend this a little bit. So anywhere where you have those deep blacks, feel free to throw down some rendering lines just to get them blended in nicely. And you don't have to render like crazy. I know some people like to do a lot of rendering and other people like to just keep it pretty simple. So that's entirely personal preference as well. Personally, rendering is my favorite part of the drawing process, so I like to kind of do a lot of it. But still try as best as I can to keep it kind of clean. Sometimes it's hard, but you know. So here I'm just kind of blending in these lines, and actually I'm going to go in with a thicker line here just to blend it a bit nice. And kind of as I go along rendering, I kind of like to also throw in a little bit of texture. Which, that's just what those things are. You don't have to do that, I just like to. I don't know, maybe it makes it look messier. I don't know, but I like it, it's fun. Okay, so there's one side of the face, and now we're gonna go up to 17 size, I think should work, because we just want a thicker line there to blend this kind of forehead area in. I'm gonna go back down to 12. So how about use a 15? And I'm just gonna kind of blend both sides here because we kind of have two intersecting blacks right now. Just gonna kind of blend that out. You don't want to get your brush size too small. I make that mistake sometimes, and it just, I find, ends up making your rendering a lot messier than it needs to be. or sometimes maybe render too much and render areas that you don't really need to render, but it's so fun. So here I'm still just going in and rendering and going in and rendering. Okay, now what I'm doing is there are a few areas where even though they're not the darkest shadowed areas, they still are definitely a bit shadowed. So what I'm gonna do after I render this is go into those areas and I'm gonna cross hatch them. It's basically like what we've been doing to render, but I'm just gonna add more cross hatching just to give you that variation in your values. So for example, look at the slope here. Typically the slope, this goes like this and then dips down here and comes up and dips down again. It's like a little mustache. Anyways, so because that dips down, it's going to be more cast in shadow in the lit areas. So I'm going to just go in and I'm going to cross hatch that area, and I'm going in with a pretty fine pen right now, just an 8 size milli pen, because I don't want it to be too drastic. I want it to still be pretty subtle, but I definitely do want to shadow that area a bit more. Okay, so you see how that just gives it a bit more of a three-dimensional look. And I'm trying to keep these cross-hatching lines going kind of, I don't know how to explain it, in the direction with the shape of the form. So you don't want to just do it all flat like this, right? You want to kind of keep it continuous with the planes of the face. So here I'm just going to do the same thing. I don't know exactly how I want to cross-hatch this, but we'll just go for it and see how it looks. Just the luxury of working digitally, because you can undo if you want. And those are just texture lines, whatever. Gotta look out. Okay, so getting pretty close here. Just gonna keep rendering out some of these parts that I seem to have forgotten about. Gonna add a few more texture lines in some places. Gonna go back over here just to plot this ear, which I think would be shadowed a little bit. And then this, oh, we can add some a little bit more detail on the nose than I have right now. If you want. And then I don't know if I like that there. Just do a low one maybe. Go back here, and this is going to be, I don't think very super shadowed, but still definitely a bit shadowed. So we're just going to render that out. And then we're going to go back down here, and we're going to just keep rendering. Just keep rendering. Okay, so now we're pretty much done, and I would say that's that for rendering this type of lighting with Batman. So basically just remember to think about your shapes, think about where the light's coming from, and then think about the planes of your face or whatever you're drawing, and think about what areas are more raised and are going to be hit by the light, and what areas are more kind of sunken down and are going to be more cast in shadow. And then really it's about finding your own rendering style, what you like, what you think looks good, and kind of just practicing a bit every day and just keep going. And yeah, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe and comment what kind of tutorial you would like to see next.